wondered if you got any views on his perspectives on class. I mean, I think this is really a very important area. It's had a resurgence of interest in the last 10 years or so, but for so long it's been the unspoken area in terms of identity, and it's one I wrestle with, because, you know, I'm technically from a definite working class background, but, you know, I've moved in different ways, and I just wonder if you get a strong sense of his views on class, or do you think the fact that he wrote about place has almost transcended class, if that makes sense?
Well, I mean, he was the son of a railway man, but in a rural area, so a lot of the
Yeah,
people were small farmers and perhaps small merchants. So he didn't actually feel that. Well, yeah. So he didn't really come from a working class community. He was from a community which included a few wage workers, but yeah.
I don't think that kind of area of rural Monmouthshire, there would have been much awareness of class. Say that, because there weren't big enterprises, there weren't bosses, there weren't large houses and rich people driving around.
Yeah.
The distinction between the workers and the bosses was not evident in that environment. And so I expect that somebody like him suddenly arriving as a student in Cambridge, and with all the public school boys and very historical, hierarchical ways of thinking about various things, was a very formative experience. And,
yeah.
And you know, in many ways, very unacceptable. You know, the sort of, my family came over with William the Conqueror stuff, and I guess that cemented his feeling about the fact that, you know, the class system was wrong, so to speak. The proper environment didn't have these sorts of things.
No.
Now, you know,
it's about human association, wasn't it? You know, people.
Yeah, it was about proper communities and relative equality. And so I guess that makes him rather less of a class warrior, perhaps, than people who've grown up in a much more hierarchical environment. And are kind of seeing it as the bosses versus the workers. Which you wouldn't get in rural Wales.
But maybe that makes it a bit more kind of richer, and perhaps a little richer and more nuanced as well in some ways. It's a different take, isn't it?
Yeah, you see, and this goes back to the anarchist syndicalist thing. I mean, you know, workers should run their own businesses. You know, there shouldn't be too much hierarchy in government. So, the fact that he didn't describe himself as a socialist or communist in that text, I think, comes out of his own experience, which is,
that's interesting. Yeah, he didn't.
What sort of environment is rural Wales? I mean, you know, it is mostly small farmers and various sorts of artisans, and his father working for the railway company, a nationalised industry and all that sort of thing, but not self-evidently. You know, again, it's a solitary sort of work. He'd go off and do his thing in a single box. It wasn't like coal miners where
you work
factories where hundreds of people who feel some sort of working class solidarity against the bosses.
A necessary bond, to survive even,
So, you know, I guess ultimately that was his politics of believing that was a poor environment, and that a lot of what he saw elsewhere wasn't.
I'm interested that you say you never described himself as a socialist. That's interesting. I mean, I've not read everything he wrote.
Well, I'm sure he did at various times, and he was a member of the Communist Party at one time.
Yes, I know.
You know, so this is later in life where, you know, after a certain amount of thought, having been asked the question of what's your politics, he said,
"Indeed,
I'm an anarchist socialist."
Syndicalist. That's really fascinating.
I thought at the time, what does that mean?
Well, I'm gonna try and find out more about that. I know a bit about anarchism, obviously, but not syndicalism, perhaps.
Well, syndicalism is basically the cooperative movement of saying that workers should own their own industries.
Oh, right, okay.
So it's different from state socialism, so to speak, as practicing, you know, the state owns the nationalised industries. So to that extent, he's saying he's against nationalised industries, he's against capitalism, he believes in the cooperative and ways of organising things.
Well,
and anarchists, so to speak, not in the sort of pejorative sense of saying, well, you know, small government is probably a good thing, and that if it allows people to get on with organising themselves more.
Reminds me a bit of guild socialism, that whole idea, you know.
Yes,
Yeah, that's
absolutely. And a lot of things like building societies and the cooperative movement
Yeah,
come out of the same background.
yeah.
I think are quite different from the sort of Marxist view of socialism.
Absolutely. Very different. That's really interesting. I'm gonna have to pursue that. Thank you for that.
Well, yeah, I think it sort of fits with his background.
Yeah, no, it really does. Yeah, no, it really kind of makes sense. A lot of things, actually, putting it in those terms really does.